Good morning and welcome back, dear students. Please open page number 54, The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. The Story of an Hour. The protagonist of the story, Mrs. Mellard, hears the shocking news about the sudden demise of her husband in a railroad disaster. She locks herself in her personal room almost for an hour with a diverse thought. After an hour, she realizes that the news that she had heard about the death of her husband was a fake news when her husband returns back home. Let's see what happened to Mrs. Mellard after that. Let's begin the story of an hour. Knowing that Mrs. Mellard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. Since Mrs. Mellard was a heart patient, lot of care was taken to reveal to her about the sudden demise of her husband. The one who wanted to reveal the news, or the people who wanted to reveal the news to Mrs. Mellard, had taken lot of care since she was a heart patient. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. Her husband's friend Richard was there too, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brindley Millard's name leading the list of the killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. The care was taken by her own sister, that is, her sister named Josephine. It was her sister Josephine who had told her. Josephine was the one who revealed the sudden demise of her husband to her in broken sentences. She was not able to reveal the matter very easily. So therefore she revealed it to her in broken sentences, veiled hints, in an unclear hints. She did not reveal it very clearly at all because she does not know how to reveal it at all. That revealed in half concealing, and half of the things she revealed and half she concealed. Her husband's friend Richard was there too, near her. And when Josephine revealed this matter to Mrs. Mellard, her husband's friend named Mr. Richard was also there with her, near her. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brindley Millard's name leading the list of killed. It was actually this man named Mr. Richard. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received. When this news was received, he was there in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brindley Millard's name leading the list of killed. And among the people who were killed in the railroad disaster, in the railroad accident, it was Brindley Millard, who is the name of her husband, Mrs. Millard's husband's name leading the list of the people who were killed. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram. Immediately he did not run to the house of Mrs. Mellard to reveal the news. He waited for the further confirmation. He waited for the second telegram and had hastened. Once he received the second telegram, he hastened himself. Hastened over here means he hurriedly moved to, he rushed to forestall in order to reveal this matter, so that the extra problems may not occur there at all. Any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. He felt that he himself will go to the house of Mrs. Mellard and inform this news, so that Mrs. Mellard may be properly revealed about the death of her husband. She did not hear the story, as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. She wept at once, with a sudden, wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one to follow her. She did not hear the story, as many women have heard the same. She did not listen to the story as like the rest of the women, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. With a stunned inability, no woman would be able to accept the reality that her husband is dead. She wept at once. With abandonment in her sister's arms. She felt that she is totally abandoned, a kind of desertion, that is what she experienced, and therefore she wept at once with a sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. She remained in the arms of her sister and started weeping bitterly. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. After crying for some time, the grief subsided a bit. She moved it away. She went away to her room all alone. She would have no one to follow her. She did not allow anyone else to follow her. All alone, she went to her own personal room after having cried in the arms of her sister Josephine. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable roomy armchair. Comfortable roomy armchair over here means very spacious armchair. Very big armchair was placed nearby the window there. There stood, facing to the open window. Nearby the open window, there was a comfortable armchair which was placed. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion. To that chair she started moving towards. She pressed herself by the physical exertion, maybe because of the physical tiredness that haunted her body, which has completely troubled her body. She was physically completely exhausted and seemed to reach into her soul. And this exertion, this tiredness, it seemed that from the body it has reached to her soul as well. Both the physical and mental exhaustion she was undergoing. She was facing a kind of mental and physical agony. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aqueous with the new spring life. The delicious breath of rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was carrying his wares. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly, and countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. She could see in the open square. Open square over here means in the open area. She was looking outside through her window. There she could see in the open square, in the open space, she could see before her house the tops of trees that were all aqueous. Aqueous over here means the trees were very, very vibrant with the new spring life. It was almost a spring season, and because of which the trees were almost aqueous with the new spring life. And the delicious breath of the rain, and she could experience the pleasing smell of the rain was in the air. The air was filled with the soothing smell of the rain, and in the street below a peddler was crying his wares. Wares over here means the equipments that the peddler used to carry in his arms, into his hands. And the notes of the distant song which someone was singing reached her faintly. And from far away, someone was singing a song, and she was able to hear that song very faintly. And the countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. Eaves over here means the edges of the hill. And there were countless sparrows that were twittering. Twittering means he could hear the chirping sound of the sparrows in the eaves. In the eaves over here means from the edge of the hills, she was able to hear the chirping sound of the sparrows. Once again, let's see. As she looked outside through her window, what are the things that she was able to visualize there? She could see the vibrant, that is occur with the new spring, the tree that were occur with the new spring season, and the soothing as well as the pleasing smell in the air of the rain, as well as she could hear the sound of the peddler crying out for his own commodities to sell, as well as she was able to hear the distant song coming from, as well as the chirping sound of the birds which she was able to hear at the edges of the hills. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the cloud that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing in the window. Through her window facing towards the window, the other things that she was able to see, there were patches, there were certain gaps or certain cracks of the blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above. The sky was filled with the clouds. Certain times clouds one was above the clouds, one were above the other in the west facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair. There was a cushion which was placed on her chair. So she threw herself, her head, back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless. Completely she was motionless, except when a sob came upon in her throat. The only time, the moment that has taken place in her body was when she started sobbing. Except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. As like a child who cries for a longer period of time, he goes on crying and ultimately the child sleeps and he used to sob in his dream. So that was the way she started sobbing in between. That was the only time there was a certain movement in her. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of the sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated suspension of intelligent thought. The writer further describes about the protagonist of the story by saying that she was young, with fair, calm face. Her face was a fair face, as well as it was very calm, whose lines bespoke over here means it indicated repression, a kind of rejection, and even a certain strength. At the same time, it indicated a kind of strength. But now, there was a dull stare in her eyes, but her stare is dullish now, and whose gaze was fixed away of the yonder on one of the patches of the blue sky. She started gazing at, let's see what happened here, but now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away of the yonder on one of those patches of the blue sky. She started gazing at the patches, the cracks that was created over there at the blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. Nobody is able to say exactly what takes place in her. It was not a reflection. The writer says that she was not reflective at all, but rather it indicated, the gaze indicated a suspension. Suspension over here means an act of getting delayed and intelligent thought. Maybe because she is planning to think about something very, very intelligently, and a suspension of the intelligent thought. That could be the meaning of the stare towards the patches in the sky. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it fearfully. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name, but she felt it, creeping out of the sky, reaching towards her through the sounds, the scents, the color that filled the air. So there was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it fearfully. She feels that something is slowly approaching her. There was something coming to her, and she was waiting for it fearfully, and she was waiting for it very, very fearfully. Let's see, what was it? She did not know. Exactly, she does not know what is coming to her. She knew that something is coming to her, but she does not know exactly what it is. She is unable to name what it is. It was too subtle. Subtle means very obscure. It was very, very unclear and elusive. Elusive means very hard to understand. It was subtle and elusive to name. She was not able to name what it is because it was subtle. It was unclear and it was elusive. Very, very hard to understand what it is, because of which she does not know what is approaching to her. She knew that something is approaching to her. She feels a kind of something that approaches to her, but she does not know exactly to name it because it was quite subtle and elusive. But she felt it creeping out of the sky, but she was able to experience what it is. She felt it creeping out of the sky. She felt that it is moving toward from the sky, reaching toward her through the sound, the sense and the color. It came to her through some sounds, through some smell, as well as color that filled the air, which was totally filled in and around the air. She is not able to name what it is, but she knew that it is something, or she felt that it was something that was coming from the sky through the sound, through the scent and the color that filled the air in and around her. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her and was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed over every inch of her body. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. Tumultuously over here means it started beating very, very loudly. Her bosom, her chest started racing and it started beating loudly. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her. She was trying to recognize what is approaching her. Once again, let's see. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her. She told earlier that something approached her, but at the same time, it was subtle and elusive. It was unclear. Now she started to feel something, beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her. And she was striving to beat it back with her will, but she wanted to beat it back with her willpower, but it was impossible. Let's see how the writer says, as powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. Her will was powerless, exactly like that of her powerless hands. That is what the writer uses here, as powerless as her two white slender hands. Slender means weak hands. Her hands were quite weak. With those weak hands, she was not able to remove the thing. So was her willpower as well. As powerless as her two white slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips, and she abandoned it herself. She knew that she will not be able to force it strongly, to stop it very, very powerfully. She realized that when she abandoned itself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. Certain words came out through her lips which were parted slightly. She said it over and over under her breath. She said it again and again under her breath. Let's see what they are. Free, free, free. These were the words that came out of her slightly parted lips. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. They stayed keen and bright. Her pulse beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. Let's see a slight change that takes place within her. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went away from her eyes. Her eyes were very, very terrorful eyes. Now the writer says that the vacant stare, she was staring towards the sky, the vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went away from her eyes. Slowly, slowly, the fear moves away from her eyes, and they stayed keen and bright, and her eyes became very keen, very observant, and very bright. The dull eyes turned to be bright and keen eyes. Her pulses beat fast. The pulses started beating faster, faster and faster, and the coursing blood over here means the flow of blood, warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She realized the movement of blood through her veins, and that made her warmer in her body. Her body turned to be more and more warmer and relaxed every inch of her body, and therefore she was able to relax all the part of her, the entire part of her body. She experienced a kind of relaxation now. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and grey and dead. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long perception of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. And she opened and spread her arms out of them in welcome. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. She felt that it's a monstrous joy, a great joy that embraces her. That is what the sudden transition that had taken place within her. The blood started pumping through her veins, and her stare changed. Lot of changes that were taken place within her, and she uttered the words free, free, free. Now she realizes that, she feels that she did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held her. She feels that, is it not a joy that is an extreme joy, monstrous joy, that is the word the writer uses here, that held her up. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. Trivial means unimportant. A clear and exalted perception, a kind of different outlook, enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. She felt of taking it as an unimportant one. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death. And she knew that, once again let's see that, she knew that she would weep again, she will cry again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, when she sees the kind, folded hands folded in death. That is what she feels, that when the dead body of her husband is brought in front of her, all this exalted happiness, the joy will run away from her. The moment she sees the dead body of her husband, the folded hands, the tender folded hands in death, the face that had never looked save with love. And further the writer says, the face that had never looked save with love, except with love. It was the face that looked her upon always with an affection and love. That was the speciality of her husband. He looked at her always affectionately. The face that had never looked save with love upon her, always looked affectionately towards her. Her face was always affectionate, fixed and grey and dead, which is fixed somewhere and grayish and is dead. When she sees that face, certainly the joy that overpowers her at the present moment may vanish from her. The moment she sees the dead body of her husband, now she has only heard the news about the death of her husband. She has not seen the dead body at all. So that is what she says. The moment her dead body is brought over here, and if she looks at it, all this exalted joy will vanish from her. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come. But she feels about the long procession of years to come. There are many more years that she has to live over here on this earth that would belong to her absolutely. And all these years to come certainly will be her own. Absolutely it is going to be her own. and she opened and spread her arms out to them in window. She opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome, and she spread out her arms in order to welcome those days, the days which is going to be absolutely her own. There is nobody to overpower her. She is now presently waiting for those days to come in her life. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the fact seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. She was happy to think there would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She is absolutely free. There will be nobody to live for her during those coming years. The coming years, there will be nobody to rule her. She would live for herself, and she would be living for no one. She would be living only for her own life. There would be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon the fellow creature. She feels that both men and women feel to have a kind of personal or supreme power. That is what both men and women want to have in their lives. So such a kind of life she is reaching into. All these days she had someone to control her, that was her husband. Now her husband is no more, and that was the reason she was happy with. Now she realizes that there is nobody to overpower her, and there is no one for whom she has to spend her the rest of the life for. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. It was a kind of different understanding for her, a new way of thinking. She does not know whether it is a cruel thought or it is an appropriate thought. She was quite unaware about that, but she stressed on she is going to live only for herself, and that is what was more important for her, and that was the reason she was very happy at her heart. And yet she had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in face of this possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? And yet she had loved him sometimes. She loved him, but not always. She had loved him sometimes. Often she had not. Often she had not loved him. Only at a certain time she loved him, not always. That is what often she had not. What did it matter? It doesn't matter at all. What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in face of possession of self-assertion? What is more important for her is self-assertion, one's own views, one's own desire. That is what is more important than everything else. That is what she feels at the present moment, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being. And that is what is the most powerful force in her being. The most important powerful force in her life is one's own views, my own viewpoint, my own desire. That is what is more important for me. Nobody to control my desires. There is no one in my life from this moment who will be overpowering me, and that is what she wished to have in her life, and she is very happy with it. Free, body and soul free, she kept whispering. She went on whispering the same thing, that is free, body and soul free. Both physically and mentally I am free. She started whispering it. She went on whispering it again and again. Free, body and soul free. Totally I am free. Both physically and mentally I am free. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. Louis, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louis? For heaven's sake, open the door. So Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring for admission. She went on requesting for admission. She kept herself, she stood in front of the door, keeping the lips through the keyhole, shouting out, Lucy, open the door. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. Please open the door. If you are remaining all alone inside the room and crying the entire day, you will fall ill. That is what her sister Josephine started to cry out from outside. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. What are you doing inside? For heaven's sake, open the door. Josephine felt that she must be crying bitterly over there, all alone remaining in the room, thinking about the sudden demise of her husband. So therefore she said, please open the door, otherwise you will make yourself ill. Go away. I'm not making myself ill. No. She was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. So she said, as her sister Josephine cried out through the halls, open the door. My sister Josephine, please open. My sister Louise, please open the door. She responded, go away, I am not making myself ill. She says that I am not falling ill, I am not making myself ill at all, which means I am perfectly alright. That is what she responded to her sister Josephine. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life. In reality, she was taking elixir. Elixir means it's a kind of a magic liquid to cure the illness. So that is what the writer here says. No, she was drinking a very elixir of life through that open window. She was looking out through the window, and such a kind of thought which was moving throughout her life, throughout her mind. And her fancy was running right along those days ahead of her. Spring days, the summer days, and all sort of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. Her fancy was running very freely. Running right over here means running very freely. Her imagination flew on very freely along those days ahead of her. She started thinking about the days that are ahead of her, the free days that are ahead of her. There is nobody to overpower her. There is no one to control her at all. The spring days and summer days, all sort of days that would be her own. She thinks about the summer days, all sorts of days, the winter days, every kind of day which are going to be only her own. She breathed a quick prayer that life might be long, and she wished for, let my life be for a longer period of time. I must be able to live for a longer period of time. That is what she wishes now. I wanted to live a free life for a longer period of time. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder, with a kind of shiver. Yesterday she thought about that life might be long. If life is long, in such a situation where I am ruled by somebody else, she did not wish to have the long days yesterday, and today her thinking pattern has completely changed. Today she feels that the life might be long. I have to spend my life again all alone, nobody to control me at all. She rose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. She rose at length and opened the door. Immediately she got up from there and opened the door to her sister's importunities. Importunities means repeated requests. Her sister Josephine was requesting her to open the door, otherwise you are going to make yourself ill. And in response to her sister's importunities, she got up from the chair and she opened the door. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, a kind of excessive victory. That is what the meaning of a feverish triumph, excessive victory in her eyes. She felt that she is victorious at the present moment, and she carried herself unwittingly like the goddesses of victory. She was unaware that she is moving exactly like that of goddesses of victory. She clasped her sister's waist. She held the waist of her sister, and together they descended the stairs. And both herself and Josephine, they moved down towards the stairs, and Richard stood waiting for them at the moment. And Richard's, her husband's friend, who gave this news about the sudden demise of her husband, was still waiting there. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. So they came down, both of them, both the sisters came down. Richard was waiting for their arrival at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Brindley Millard, who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his grip sack and umbrella. He had been far from the scene of accident and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. As both of them came down, they could hear, someone was opening the front door with a latch key. With the help of a latch key, someone was opening the door. That is what the sound they all heard. It was Brindley Millard who entered, and they looked at the gate, the one who opened the gate. It was Brindley Millard who entered, a little travel-stained. Travel-stained over here means exhausted because of long travel. A little travel-stained, composedly, but at the same time he was calm. Though he was tired of long travel, at the same time he moved calmly, carrying his grip sack. Grip sack over here means the traveler's bag. Who was carrying his traveler's bag and an umbrella. He had the traveler's bag as well as his umbrella with him. With the traveler's bag and umbrella, as if he was highly exhausted because of a long travel, he entered inside the house. It was Brindley Millard. He had been far from the scene of accident and did not even know there had been one. Actually, he was not at all there in the place of accident, and he did not know even there happened such a kind of accident, such a kind of railroad accident had occurred. He never knew about it. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, and she did not understand why Josephine cried so bitterly as he entered inside. As he opened the gate and came inside the house, who was quite unaware about the railroad accident. He did not know there was such kind of accident at all, and that was the moment she heard the piercing cry of Josephine, which he did not realize at all. He did not understand why Josephine is crying so loudly. At Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife, he did not understand why Richard came to protect him, to keep him away from the sight of his wife. Richard, his friend, tried to take him away from the sight of his wife. He did not realize why it happens. Richard tried to keep him away from the sight of his wife, and he did not know the reason behind it, as well as he did not know the reason behind why Josephine started weeping so bitterly. But Richard was too late. But he could see the face of Richard. Tried to take him away from the sight of his wife, but Richard was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. And when the doctors came and the doctors examined the lady, the doctors told that when the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease. The lady died because of heart failure, heart disease of joy that kills. She died because of excessive joy. It was the overjoy that she was going on that made the death of his wife. It was her extreme happiness that led her death. 1 hour, she was waiting for the happy days to come, where there will be no one to control her. That's the end of the lesson, the story of 1 hour. Students, do complete the question answers given in your workbook. And next day, let's begin a new lesson named To Build a Fire. Lesson number 4, To Build a Fire. Thank you.